Welcome to Minority Focus. I'm your host, Jimmie Moore. Many of us have forgotten the case over in Mayfield back in the year 2000 of a young woman being murdered and burned, or burned and murdered, or which was never truly known. A horrible case. It has not gone away. And one of the people who is still very much about learning the truth about that particular case and what happened in it is my guest today, John Poole, who is a private investigator from Mayfield, Kentucky. I'm going to go ahead and give your address, your phone number.
Might be good for business, Mr. Moore. Might be good.
I want to read a few things about John, and then I'm going to ask him some things. Welcome. Glad you came.
Thank you for inviting me. I've watched your programs, and it's very interesting. You have a diverse program base.
For sure. We've been talking, what, 2 years now?
Yeah.
Wow.
We had a mutual friend, and we got together, and hopefully we've got a nice friendship.
Exactly. It's amazing how things go around sometimes, because some of the people that we're both associated with are people that I knew 40 years ago, hadn't heard of, or since one of the principal players, I'll say, in this case, his father and I were childhood playmates. And yet I had no idea he had a son, nor didn't know anything about their association at all until recently. John Poole is a licensed private investigator with over 30 years of investigative and law enforcement experience. And this experience comes from his employment with the cities of Anaheim and Brea, California. I've seen and heard and read on television that a lot of private investigators usually start out as police officers, and that's
true.
their basis
That's right.
and their grounding point. And that's your case?
That's my case.
Where did you start out as a police officer?
Well, I started in the early days of professionalizing law enforcement. I hate to say that my age, but I started in 1971 in Brea, California. In those days, you worked part-time till you became full-time. And by the time I was ready to go full-time, they wanted someone at the city of Anaheim that had a police background, but supposedly wasn't too policey.
Right.
So I got the job managing the code enforcement program in Anaheim, which is a lot the way that's ran, because Anaheim's the home of the original Disneyland,
right, and
over 350,000 people and millions of visitors a year. So we had a diverse enforcement program there, taxi cabs to home maintenance to vendors to, so I got a lot of experience with that, and through the years I stayed on with the Brea Police Department. I was a fully certified police officer, and then after I retired from Anaheim, I went back over to Brea and worked, and primarily the last years, other than filling in on patrol, I was the background, or one of the background investigators for the Brea Police Department. So I did the background on all the applicants for all the positions: police officer, dispatcher, jailer, clerk, so forth.
So you're originally from Kentucky?
Yes.
Okay, small town?
Yes, Mayfield, Kentucky.
Small town Kentucky boy from Mayfield, Kentucky, winds up in an area that large in California. Was it easy to adapt to that kind of population? Obviously a larger crime element.
Well, that's certainly true, but I went out, as many people from this area do. There wasn't that many jobs when I graduated from high school, and my mother was from California, so I had family out there, and she met my father there in World War II.
Wait a minute, time out. You're a Mayfield Cardinal fan?
I know, yeah, you better watch it, Jimmy. And that was even back in my days in high school. We were always, against Paducah. That was the biggest thing. But that's how that wound up, that I got in with Anaheim, and then Brea and then Anaheim, and went through all that. And I was just lucky that they were professionalizing law enforcement, because they paid for my college education. They paid for me to go through the police management for the International Chief of Police, and so all my training I got during the time they were professionalizing law enforcement. So I was very, very fortunate.
From what I've seen on television, there's a definite separation between what police officers do and what investigators do. Police officers are like the scene, the initial whatever, and everything after that are investigators. When you make that transfer, is there a lot of schooling, training, whatever that you have to have, or is there a lot of experience you can take with you from being a police officer?
Well, certainly when you go through the police academy and in the field, you learn how to deal with people, and you learn what's legal and what's not, and the procedures. But generally, when a police agency, and it depends on the size, certainly the bigger agencies that we sometimes interacted with, like Los Angeles Police Department, right, it was totally different. But like where I worked, you were a police officer for so many years, and then you put in to get promoted to investigator. And then as you got in, then they would put you with someone to train you, and then they would send you to different classes depending on what you were going to work. If you were going to work narcotics or homicide or whatever, they would give you that specialized training.
Right, right. My dear old mom, bless her soul, would just be so pleased that her son, who possesses a GED, high school GED, would be interviewing people who are graduates of California State University, Fullerton College, California, who has a certificate of proficiency police science, a graduate of the Training Institute of the International City Management Association, graduate of Rio Hondo Police Academy in Whittier, California, and so on and so on and so on. That's an awesome educational undertaking, but that's what you do when you're going to be a professional about something.
Yes.
And I'm learning that that's very much what you are. How many years do you spend getting to that point where you get your investigative license?
Well, the licensing is different in each state. It's different. In Kentucky, you have to get insurance, you have to take a test, you have to go through a background, fingerprinting, and so forth. So it takes several months to get approved, and it all depends if you can pass the state test to get licensed.
Right. So are there very many types of cases that you haven't been involved with or investigated?
Well, as a police officer, I've been involved in everything from murders. Fortunately, the jurisdiction that I worked in, we didn't have as many, but we offered mutual aid to adjoining communities that had more crime. So you would, you'd set up a perimeter for them, and you would do those things. So I've had a real variety of positions. The one thing that I focused the most on the last years, and what I'm really concerned with even today, is ethics in law enforcement, because as a background investigator, you have to make hard choices to see if this person will actually be the type of person that you want protecting the people out there, that has the integrity, has the ability. And so I would work with a psychologist and a polygraph examiner, and then I would make my recommendations to the chief of police. And I can say that as far as I know, I've been away from there a few years, but all the people that I did their background, I don't know of one that's turned out bad. So I'm proud of that. And I think of all my police career, the most challenging was to help the chief decide who to hire.
Right. I think I read somewhere recently where someone was going to start giving people who apply for those kinds of positions, police officer, whatever, they were going to start giving them lie detector tests to determine if racism, whatever, and all that sort of thing was in their, it's in their, constitution. So maybe that's something that's insisted on now across the board, and it should be. I was going to ask the question earlier. I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. The larger the population that you deal with, the more difficult the investigation, as far as coming to a solution, or not a solution, but as far as solving it. Okay.
Well, the larger the population, you're generally going to get more experience handling different types of crime, but there's some basics that you follow to investigate particular types of crime that would be universal, whether it was in a small town in Kentucky or a large town in Southern California. There's basic things, how you secure the crime scene, how you photograph that, how you document everything. Those should be pretty universal in this country.
Mm-hmm. I wondered, you know, if a case is focused in a particular area, say drugs. Say if you're doing something investigative about drugs, and there are so many other facets. I'm probably not going to make sense here, John, because I don't know what I'm talking about. But say in the drug area, there are so many other things involved that a criminal do.
Mm-hmm.
Does one investigator do all of that? Is it a stair-step kind of thing where somebody's accused of drugs and he's involved with this person who happens to be, do you find yourself being bounced along a long path sometimes? Am I making any sense at all?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and again, it depends on the size of the department. Small departments, you have to be able to do homicides and so forth. With drugs being so prominent and so much out there and you hear about, that usually even a smaller department has a person that just does drugs or more, because each one of these type of things you handle. If I'm enforcing drugs, you would handle that different than I was investigating an arson or a murder. You do that different. Right. Drugs are that's a whole different thing. It's just like I worked a lot in the adult businesses and things. In adult businesses, then you handle that different right. than some of the other stuff, right. especially when you get into prostitution and things like that.
So someone whose expertise is in drug enforcement, whatever, comes a murder case, there needs to be someone with a specialty in that area to do that case. But can those people be interposed in those kind of cases?
Again, it gets back to the size of the department, but if it's somebody that just had drug enforcement experience only, it'd be a real stretch, at least in my opinion, to have them do a homicide or have them do an arson, because it's a whole different type of investigation. Because a lot of the drug enforcement, at least my involvement with that, you're getting other people that have been doing drugs and they tell you who else is doing, and it just kind of goes along that way. And so homicides, arson, robbery, all those are handled differently.
Right, okay. I was being somewhat facetious in asking that, and I think you know it. Mm-hmm. I want to ask, how long have you been part of the Jessica Currin murder case?
Since March 23rd, 2007.
Wow, that's mm-hmm. a lot of years. Mm-hmm. I've read a lot about it, don't necessarily know a lot about it, but from what I do know, what I have read, a lot of stones unturned. And in some cases, stone unturned and put back.
I would agree with that.
You're confronting a lot.
Yeah.
You've confronted a lot of that. And what you're doing is lifting those stones and looking.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Right. How is? Should I ask how that's going?
Well, it's a challenge, because there's been 13 years just about since that tragic death, and unfortunately, in my opinion, from the get-go, it wasn't properly handled, and it just went from one person, one agency to the other, and then witnesses changed their testimony, and then so you have, like if somebody went to look at that case today, it would take you months to even go through the interviews and so forth. And these type of crimes, or any type of crimes, the sooner you interview the people right after the occurrence of the murder or robbery or whatever, you're going to get more accurate information, because the rumor mill hasn't had time to start. Exactly. And where this, we look at almost a totally different story from where it started with Mayfield Police Department, from where it wound up with now it's no longer called the Kentucky Bureau of Investigation. It's part of the Attorney General's office. So it's changed. And in between, there was 2 state police investigators. I mean, there's just been so many people. And then there's a person that does newspaper articles and movies. And his name's Tom Mangold. And he got involved, came over here, and along with a Kentucky housewife, supposedly they've solved the crime in a week. And so many people it had, and then there was a reward. Some people I've talked to said they wanted the reward money, and basically they would say whatever they needed to say to get the money. And you're dealing with people that possibly has information on this, that has a drug background, and from my experience, if somebody's really hurting for drugs, they will go along with a program to get some money to get some more. And not saying that's what happened in this, but everything that when I was taught, and they still teach this, the basics in the police academies, is that even though somebody tells you that so-and-so did this, you don't just go on that. You've got to collaborate that. In this case, if anybody looks at it independently, you don't even have to have law enforcement training. You will see that it was never collaborated. And in fact, the Kentucky Innocence Project was involved in this. That's another group, and then their funding went out. But they were going to continue it, but for whatever reason didn't. And their investigator, the primary investigator on that, has presented an affidavit that we've given to various authorities saying that he interviewed all 3 of the state's key witnesses, which that was the whole state's case. There's no physical evidence to speak of in this. It's just those people's testimony that they were forced to lie.
I'm trying to take in all that you're saying. You did just say there is no evidence, there is no physical evidence?
Well, there's a diary that one of them's supposed to have written, but when the Secret Service testified at the cross trial, they couldn't find that ink in their library of inks.
Okay, Quincy Cross is the accused, the convicted person that is now in prison for the crime. And there is no physical evidence, nothing
that would truly collaborate it. If you break it down, just like if you could test that ink today, because there's several years between when an ink is manufactured and before it goes into the Secret Service library. And there's some inks from China, Pakistan that will never get in there. But one of the witnesses' story is now, and in this affidavit that was signed by the investigator, that she wrote that diary in the back seat of the police car going down the road.
And that's the heaviest thing that has this person in prison now. So in possibly, in some probability, he's not going to stay there.
Well, you have to go through, and he's going through the appeals process. The one thing you have to remember is one thing, the reason I was so, and still am so big on ethics, is that it's easy, whereas California, New York, Kentucky, or whatever, it's much easier to inject somebody in the criminal justice system than want to get them out. So it truly is that you're innocent till proven guilty, but when you go into that system, you have to pay for a lawyer if you can afford one. There's hearing after hearing. You have to get discovery from the state. So some people plead to crimes, and they prove the National Innocence Project has exonerated 300 people since they began. And so that tells you there, police, attorneys, any of us are all humans, and mistakes can be made. But once you're in the system, it's hard to get that turned around. You look at the Memphis 3 that even had all those celebrities and everything, billboards and everything. They still had to take a plea after all that evidence to get out of jail.
Exactly. That one word, I think, is what I'd consider the magic word, and that's ethics. What is the system in Kentucky and elsewhere doing about it? Now, I know that you've said in your investigation, when you do background checks and what have you, the majority of people that you've done those are still solid in what they do. But in those obnoxious cases of things where ethics have been put on the back burner, nothing can be done. It just...
Well, most departments that are any size, and I'm sure Paducah is the size that has an internal investigation group. Where I work, they had that. If somebody made an accusation against a police officer, forcing somebody to lie, or on more force than necessary to arrest them, then that's investigated by that internal organization. Now, some places have a police commission that you can go to and they investigate it. So there's all different ways, and certainly it's a federal offense to abuse your authority under what's called a color of authority if you're violating people's civil rights. So ultimately the federal authorities could get involved if the local police.
As a private investigator, there are any number of areas that you need to get into to do what you do, to get to where you want to get to in your investigation. Do you hit a lot of open doors? I mean, not open doors, closed doors? Where does the line draw as far as what you're able to do? An attorney can go so far along doing things, and a police officer, As a private investigator, is everything wide open to you?
Well, it's not wide open, and certainly when I was a police officer or the code enforcement manager, I had access to the database for the state to run driver's license and things. And there's certain things that I can get, you pay for, or anybody can get over the internet, but it's different. I certainly don't have the authority that the police do. But on the other hand, I don't have to Mirandize people, but if you ever listen to most of my interviews, I always started out by asking them, have I threatened you? Have I offered you any money? Because all I'm looking for, and I know this sounds canned, is just what really happened. And I'm not trying to scare anybody into saying anything.
Right, right. So there's no leather pipe and bright lights?
No.
Like you see, so much on TV, you're not about that at all.
And I tried that as a police officer, and maybe when I started in the 70s, I didn't certainly look the image of the average police officer in Southern California, but I always talk to people respectfully, and I'm not saying sometimes you don't lose your temper a little bit because we're humans, but I just wanted the truth, and I wasn't going to lie to the people to get the truth. I just wanted the truth.
Right. Just from talking to you from time to time and reading some of the materials that you've given me to read about the matter, there's a can of worms, if you will, that hasn't been opened in this case.
In my opinion, and unfortunately, it's such a large can that I could see that there would be resistance to open that can, because there's so much to go back through. There's so much that you would have to investigate. But even though I have somebody involved in this, the real truth of the matter, and although others would say he just cares about a relative, the real thing is, I always believed in scrutiny of all law enforcement, the judicial system, the attorney and all, and it should be transparent when the case is done. There shouldn't be withholding anything back. You're either you did it or you didn't do it. And it's good to, it's just like you take your car in, or you go to a better example, you go to the doctor every year for a physical, see how you're doing. What is wrong with having outside federal authorities, with all that this has been brought up, to come in, take a look at it? If it's a clean bill of health, then go on the way. But somebody needs to be the gatekeeper for the criminal justice system.
For sure. Someone commented that they wondered who was dealing with the case in Mayfield when it occurred. They wondered if it was Barney Fife, Gomer, and Otis, that were doing the case. The case seems to be ridiculously that may be biased, I don't know, from what I've learned, because I do not know anything about the guilt or not guilt. All I've learned so far is that you believe that it is not a complete case, that all is not known, that things were not done properly, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the really wonder about all of this is that now the fathers of both the deceased and the incarcerated are joining forces, if you will, to find the truth, not necessarily to determine guilt, innocence, or whatever, or perhaps in one case, but to determine the truth in the matter. And that's a really good a good something to have when that person whose daughter was murdered can join forces with the accused murderer, sit down, talk with you, join with you to find out the truth in this case. In a future show, I'll be talking with John, along with both parents, the parents of the deceased and the incarcerated. I think you'll be pretty surprised. I guess that's a word. No, let's go with blown away by some of the things that have been uncovered in this matter. Again, I've known the father of the incarcerated for a number of years, and regardless, I know that both of those people would like to know what happened, and that seems to be this mind-boggling question: what happened? No one seems to really know, for sure. John, I appreciate your coming.
Thank you. And you might mention that Joe Currin, you mentioned that
Jessica's father.
He has questions. He is having a rally April the 6th.
Thank you.
At Kiwanis Park in Mayfield, Kentucky. It'll be at 3 p.m. He's inviting anyone out there just to listen to his side and the other people's side. And he has petitions that he's petitioning our U.S. senators and congressmen to get an independent federal investigation of this matter and put it to rest once and for all.
Wonderful. That's April the 6th?
April the 6th at 3 p.m. at Kiwanis Park. That's on the Cuba Road in Mayfield.
I don't know if any of those flyers have circulated in the city, but we'll talk about that later.
Yes.
And perhaps get some circulars out there. Again, thank you very much for it. Stay tuned. In the very near future, we're going to get a little more into this matter with the parents of the deceased and the accused. Hope you'll join us. There's a lot of ground to cover in this. Thanks again, John.
Thank you.
For Minority Focus, I'm Jimmie Moore.